Hey, everybody, it's time for the ShopNotes podcast. This is episode number 248 this week. We just wrapped up a really great Woodworking in America conference, so we're giving the staff off for the week. And in fact, we have a special treat for you. Special correspondent from Popular Woodworking, Collin, got a chance to interview Nick Offerman. Probably know who that guy is. He's got a lot going on. Just was recently in Des Moines for a book signing event, and Collin got a chance to interview him. So you'll hear that as our special Shop Notes podcast episode this week. Hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel where you can see what's going on with all of our podcasts. Like and subscribe, ring the bell for the notifications so that we get more comments and recommendations through there. If you haven't subscribed to the Shop Notes podcast, do that at your favorite local podcastery. Also, leave questions, comments, and smart remarks either at the YouTube channel, Shop Notes Podcast, over on YouTube, or you can send us an email, woodsmith@woodsmith.com. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gorilla Glue. When you're working on a project in the shop, you put in hours of effort. The last thing you want is for it to come apart because the glue didn't hold. That's why you should keep a bottle of Gorilla Wood Glue on the bench. It's non-foaming, cleans up with water, and dries a natural color. And of course, there's the reliable Gorilla strength you can always trust. Also, check out the Gorilla Wood Filler for strong, durable repairs. Gorilla is strong enough for the pro and easy enough for the beginner. Built by you, backed by Gorilla. Now let's join in with Collin and Nick.
Okay, so Nick, you have a new book called Little Woodchucks. It's all about woodworking with children. Where did the idea for this book come about?
Well, I have had very good fortune writing a string of books with my publisher, Dutton Books, and I've got this great editor named Jill Schwartzman. And so, once I finished my last couple of outings, we just have brainstorming sessions, and there's a handful of books that I've been pitching for 15 years now, which is disturbing. And this is one of them. I also really have always wanted to do a book with Lee, who ran my wood shop for 10 years. And her having a couple of boys of her own was part of the reason that she left me in tears. My tears, not hers. I remember her with a very big smile when we shook hands and parted. But so it was kind of a culmination of all those things. If I could, there just aren't enough hours in the day or months in the year to do all the things I want to do. If I could, I would write a lot of woodworking and just crafting texts, because the older I get and the older our civilization gets, the more we are, in my opinion, heading to hell in a handbasket, inviting corporations and tech to control our lives, which I abhor. The idea of like having a company drive my vehicle instead of me just seems so counterintuitive to what makes me joyful about being a human being. And at the core of what I feel to be my competence in life is being taught by my parents to use tools, whether it's in the kitchen or the wood shop or the garage. And so, when I get mad at the things that I think are national and global failures of morality, instead of like getting in an argument with some, soft incel online, I say, what can I do? Where can I create some positivity? I know, let's make a book that's like a secret manifesto, encouraging kids and their parents to make things for themselves.
I like it. That's actually one of the things I really enjoyed about the book is in the book, when you are talking to these kids, you are talking to them almost as like a peer. You're using high level vocabulary, using words like military industrial complex and stuff like that. Which I think kids like to be talked to that way. They like to be considered part of what's going on, and they do know more than we give them credit for. That being said, is there like a certain sort of target age that you wrote for, like an age that 10 and up, 8 and up, something like that?
Not really. I mean, it's anybody, all my books are kind of for anybody who jives with my sense of humor or my sensibility. And so like I've had fully grown adults who stare at me blankly because they don't get me, and they're like, well, I think you're a smart ass. I'm not sure what you're trying to get across here. But then I'll have 8-year-olds that we can kind of wink at each other, and they're like, yeah, sorry, my dad's a square. And so, there's sort of a sense of humor, I think, in addressing it to the little woodchucks of the world, but talking to them as though, we're all living these hard-bitten existences where we might have to be involved in gambling and the consumption of alcohol as well.
Yeah, I that message that getting on a soapbox, if you will, pushing against this intrusion of technology into all of our lives, but into kids' lives where we kind of do have what some people fear is like a tablet generation going up, and this push against AI that you are encouraging. That's something that really spoke to me, and I'm hoping it'll speak to other kids and parents as well. Like, get outside, move your body, use your hands, use your mind independently, sort of thing.
Well, something I keep coming back to, one of the most prescient pieces of art I've experienced in our lives, is the great animated film Wall-E, and specifically the depiction of these fat baby-like human adults who have allowed everything to be done for them. They've softened their lives with luxury, so they just float around on these like hover lounges, and all of their meals are brought to them in the form of a smoothie. And then suddenly, when they get in trouble, they realize, oh no, we've nearly forgotten how to fly a spaceship or how to do anything for ourselves. And I mean, that's the whole joy and magic of being a human, is that we are given consciousness, we have coordination, we can do things with our brains and our hands to affect improvement around us, whether it's building furniture or homes or clothing, or it's making food or giving a massage, or it's unbelievable. And the fact that we would be so sheep-like lulled into the idea from corporations where they're like, put your feet up, let us let us give you a robot vacuum, and let's give you a self-cleaning house, let's give you a self-driving car. It's taking away our agency of what is delightful about being a human being. Then we might as well just get plugged into the matrix and become like, weird tube feed pods. And I'm personally against that. And I think everyone is against that if they stop and think about it. The problem is many of us no longer have the chance to stop and think about it because we're too busy scrolling through the company's messaging.
There isn't, and I have found, almost inadvertently, that I have lost certain skills that I once had. I used to, I'd navigate using a set of printed off directions, and I learned to go places. And now, like, I'm driving to my parents' house, and I'm like, I should probably pull up Google Maps. I'm like, I know how to get there, but it's taken away so subtly in some ways that independence.
I agree, and it's nefarious because in a lot of ways the technology undoubtedly makes our lives better, and makes it's going. I think it's going to move society forward. But I can't. David Bowie had some wonderful things to say about the internet before he died, about how it's incredibly magical and it's a miracle, and it also is going to kill us. Like, it can be both things. A human being can be both things, and the world can be both things. And so I wrote in my first book about how I was a map guy, and I wasn't going to give over to my device to GPS to get me places, because what if, I'm an old-fashioned curmudgeon, and becoming more so every second. And so I was like, well, what if the satellite goes down? What if I don't have a signal? Suddenly you're in the middle of, you don't know where you are, and you got no map. And so I still believe that. I still try to live with an analog backup plan, but at the same time, navigation apps tell me if there's traffic, that tells me if there's an accident, or just, you know what I mean? There are things about it that I can use to my advantage. The trick is to not let it take over all of my skills.
Yeah. And with that becoming a curmudgeon, do you think that's more you becoming a curmudgeon, or you staying who you've always been, and society is running towards something that, you don't want it to go there necessarily?
Well, I mean, I think they might be the same thing, because I imagine, the song that I'm singing, we've heard versions of it over the decades and centuries. Like, I'll be goddamned if I'm going to use one of these new gasoline-powered, automobiles, or the radio, or the television, or motion pictures, or all. I fortunately a roommate 30 years ago, like, dumped all of his money into a laser disc collection. and at the time it was like, man, that's really cool. And I envy your vision, that you can see into the future, that this is where things are going. And it is where things were going for like 15 minutes. And now he's working at a gas station.
Well, and it's the same actually with tools too. What is this newfangled electric saw? And that's come all the way to today, where, the debate about whether or not a CNC is woodworking, which to me it is. It's a different type of woodworking than hand tool working, but you're working wood. Someone that's using a CNC machine, they have at least some level of appreciation for the material that they're using. At least I would hope they would. It's not an NFT or something.
I agree with you. Like, I don't want to be a purist about, who am I to judge what is art or what is woodworking? If you're using a robot to cut your joinery, you're naturally going to be able to achieve probably more complex and difficult joinery. And so perhaps if you're building a sculpture or a piece of furniture, you can do something more magnificent than you would without the robot. My argument, if we were debating it, is why? Like, if you don't have the satisfaction of having done it with your own tactile cleverness, then is it gratifying in the same way that it would be if you had cut all your dovetails by hand, as it were? And I think it's different for everybody. I love, that's where I draw the line in my own shop. Before CNC ever showed up, or like I mean, this is where the curmudgeon part comes in. I refuse to trust a laser level. When those showed up, I was like, look, I get it. It looks really great. But that's not what I learned. I trust a level. I trust a plumb bob. Because that's gravity that I can see, and I understand that, even in my shop, I had young people to design things. I always drew all of my furniture with a pencil and with a scale rule and a square and so forth. And I have the young people designing stuff with SketchUp programs and all of that. And I appreciate the efficacy and the utility of that. Just for me personally, I was like, all right, I'm going to draw the line here. And specifically, as you teach yourself woodworking, You come across every time-saving device, every there's so many cool gadgets that you're like, ooh, that is neat. And then of course it gathers dust on your shelf because it's not as good as the tried and true methods. Lee, my co-author, has a great saying that came from her first shop, which is the lazy carpenter works the hardest. And we always find that to be true when somebody says this is a labor-saving device. You always something ends up being wrong. So in our shop, when it came time to get a dovetail cutting jig to use with a router, that was where I said, okay, I don't want one of those. Now, if I was making shaker chest of drawers for a living, then I would want one of those. And I don't ever judge someone for using any of this technology. I just feel that I want to house I want my feet to be planted firmly on the joy and efficacy and gratification of hand tools and using a sharp chisel and cleverness rather than software.
Yeah. No, there's something to be said for trusting your eyes, your instincts. You can read what's on the ruler in front of you. I remember one time I have one of those digital gauges on my router tells me the height, and I was trying to dial it in and spending all this time going up, one decimal point at a time. And then finally I turned it off and just used my eyes and got it right the first try. And it was very much like does this tool have a place? Yes, but it's not making me a better woodworker. It's not necessarily at this point in time doing anything for me besides having me stare at a screen at a time where I don't need to be staring at a screen.
Yeah. That's arguably that's another great point, is that for me, using tools, whether it's a shovel in the yard or my table saw, those are times when I get to escape what the world has become. I get to escape the world of the flood of information that we're constantly navigating, and just have an effect on a project, digging a hole, planting a tree, working in a garden, or working in the woodworking shop. And I've had friends with shops that are, guys in Manhattan that are working in the most high-end apartments and penthouses and brownstones, doing really high dollar work, and their shops reflect that. So they'll have a table saw and a planer and a joiner and a molding machine from these European companies where their table saw costs as much as a Hummer. And you can dial in, the bevels, and it has a self-feeding apparatus. And again, so I see them and I've used them, and I say, well, that's really neat, but it's the same as a self-driving car. You're no longer cutting that wood. Your robot is cutting the wood. And the whole reason I loved starting to become a woodworker was that I could take a hammer and some nails, and I could make something that I could stand on or sit on or use to climb up to the second floor, etc. And that feels like a superpower. And, for me, again, it's like when I played the character Ron Swanson, and he had certain proclivities about what he would eat and what he wouldn't eat. People to this day, they want simplicity. They want a parental figure to say, look, only eat red meat and celery. People want to be told that so that they can feel like they're making a good choice, because sometimes when we have too much choice, I think it becomes confusing, and that's when corporate messaging cuts through. It is confused by all the choices? How about Coca-Cola? It's delicious and will burn everything out of your throat. And that's true. It's very good for cleaning pennies. But so that's my bag. Is I often when I sort of espouse my opinions in my books, I'm talking to myself as much as my readership. to say, look, no matter who people vote for, I want to remember they're my neighbors, and I want to try and talk sense to them because I have affection for them, because ultimately, I feel that we all share this planet, and I want us ultimately to get along, even if they have dumb ideas. I have dumb ideas. My brother has dumb ideas. I still hope they will love me and he will love me. I love him, and so that this is part of my whole soapbox issue also has to do with agriculture. I come from a farming community. My family all grew up on farms. Half my family are still farmers, and the work ethic and a sense of self-sustainability that I bring from my family, I want that for everybody. I feel like the world more and more quickly are forgetting to think about things like, where does their food come from and what is in it, and what is in the hearts of the people providing our food. To me, that's my base issue, and then it relates to all of our resources, including trees and our wood and our woodworking, which happens to be, I'm not a master chef, but I can make a pretty decent three-legged stool. So I will talk about our food through the lens of my wood shop. But it all comes down to like understanding how we are feeding ourselves and our families versus how we're letting corporations do that, and we're powerfully losing that battle at the moment.
We are, and even so much. I mean, getting rid of shop classes in schools has taken away so much. I hate to call it common sense because you have to learn it from somewhere. But on some level, it is a common sense thing. Like, how do I replace a doorknob? It's plug and play. If the hole's already in the door, you just unscrew a couple screws, you put the new one in. But if you've never done something like that, a relatively simple task is suddenly really difficult. And then once you give up on something like that, then you're giving up step by step away from understanding how the world around you works, understanding how your own house and life are put together. Then you end up with this huge gap basically between like what the needs of most people are. Most people need to know how to do a few basic things with tools. They should understand at least like, oh, I could grow tomatoes in my garden. Um, but if you're losing that education at a young age, you never get the opportunity to discover that you can do that it's not that hard.
It's not, and I mean, a few things spring to mind hearing what you're saying. Well, the first is my favorite writer, Wendell Berry, the great Kentucky agrarian, says something really sadly humorous about how, and I'm paraphrasing, but that any 10-year-old today knows how a baby is produced, but very few of them know how to make a potato, which is so sad but true. And when I first got to theater school at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, in the middle of the cornfields, it naturally was with a bunch of cool city kids. These acculturated kids. This is in the late 80s, and these slick Chicago kids and just kids who knew a lot more about popular culture than I did. And I was really intimidated. I felt like a real rube, which I was. I was a country kid. I had never heard of any Beatles songs besides like I Want to Hold Your Hand. So I had a lot to learn. But as part of our theater program, we got into the scene shop, and everybody was required to take scene shop and lighting and costume shop. And first of all, in costume shop, I could use a needle and sew my button on, and that made everybody kind of look. But a couple of the other kids could do that. Then we got into the scene shop, and I hammered a couple nails. They said, here, we're going to learn how to build a theater flat, a piece of wall. And I was like, great. I hammered a couple nails, And you would have thought that I just pulled a dinosaur egg out of my ass. These kids looked at me like, how can you do that? Where did you learn to do that? And I was so flabbergasted to say, how can you not hammer a goddamn nail? Like, what have you been doing with your life? And then as I, you know, have gone on to work in a business that requires an audience or requires generally an urban setting to have movie studios or theaters or what have you. I work with a lot of people who have had lives that weren't rural, that never required any tool use. So more often than not, people that are my peers don't know the difference between a Phillips head screwdriver and a standard, or just don't even, to your point, they can barely replace a light bulb, and anything more complicated, they have to call somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what this book is trying to address. It's saying what you said, which is have an understanding how the world works around you. Believe me, if you take the time to learn how to make this Japanese toolbox, you're going to get better at driving in traffic, at navigating your relationships, at seeing the sort of flow charts and problem solving techniques required to make your life go easier in every way.
You want a glue that you can trust, and fortunately, Titebond has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp time to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance, look to Titebond, the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit titebond.com. This episode of the ShopNotes podcast is also sponsored by Harvey Industries. Good enough is not good enough. See all of our new tools at harveywoodworking.com.
And yeah, that's so true. Once you realize that you can follow steps and use your brain to do this sort of thing, it unlocks more avenues. You know, like I learned a little bit about woodworking, and then if I have to replace a faucet, it's like, well, I know how to follow instructions. There's instructions in books and online. I just go step by step and make sure I'm paying attention to the order that the pipes go together, the same way I would the order of a joint going together.
Yeah.
As long as you're not trying to cut corners, which everyone wants to do in woodworking, everyone wants to do in life, but you know, there are things you do and don't cut corners on, and it's learning where to do that at.
It is, and it's understanding, you know, it's breaking the ice of understanding that people, you know, not that long ago, everyone generally had some of this knowledge. You know, if you go decades ago, every farm, of which there were millions more farms, there were millions more people taking care of our land and our food systems. On every farm, you had to be self-sufficient. So not only were you providing your own food and dairy and meat, or with your community, you were providing those things, but everybody also knew how to build a barn, and also how to build furniture and how to make clothing. And so it was a crazy thing to actually have to replace a pair of shoes, for example, when the only things you're going to town for are like sugar and coffee. And so, you know, to me, that is that's a power that's within everyone's grasp. It's so easy. I mean, I have human frailties like anybody, and I've lost weeks of my life to like playing video games or other bingeable activities like drinking too much beer or other intoxicants or whatever. And I've had the good fortune of coming out the other side of those lessons saying, okay, I'm glad I learned that lesson. The beer one, maybe I had to learn more than once, but you come out the other end and say, okay, I now know I'm going to have a much happier life if I kick this excessive beer habit and treat it more like a dessert. And that goes for so many things. And I just, you know, I want to trumpet to the world that the sort of soft life where you can order your entire life off of apps on your phone, your diversions, your entertainment, your food, just everything, ultimately is you're going to suddenly be on your deathbed saying, oh no, all I did was play banjo kazooie. Like I haven't seen my mom for 17 years. You know, that's I have that proclivity just like anybody. I love shiny objects as much as any dumb monkey. And so this book is my way, like the act of making the book itself is part of my is part of my discipline and practice, saying, okay, things are going great for me as an actor. I'm very successful. Maybe I should buy a yacht and go sit on it and smoke some cigars and like live like a hip hop video. And I thankfully have crunched those numbers in the past. And I say, no, actually that will that will end in heartbreak of one sort or another. But what if I create a book of instructions to try and help people in my community, by which I mean everybody, to live lives that are self-sufficient in a way, because that's also going to make us better citizens. It's going to help us think for ourselves, so we're not getting our messaging from some jamoke, some machismo guy with a podcast selling us like virility, like manliness in a supplement, and telling us that we should like vote for people because they're bullies, instead of because they take care of others. So I mean, it's insidious. This is my radical seed, trying to do my part to foment decency in our world.
And it's very telling that is almost a radical viewpoint at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. It's crazy. I mean, it's really counter. It's many people would think it's counter patriotic to suggest that you don't just go along with what the corporations are suggesting, but instead make your own life. But I'll be goddamned if I'm gonna like let someone drive my vehicle.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've known about you for a long time, and this book highlights is you recognize, I think better than a lot of woodworkers, that in order for woodworking to be healthy, what's important, and probably even more important than people becoming masters of the craft, is making woodworking more inclusive and bringing new people into it, whether that's kids or people from communities that have otherwise been excluded from woodworking. What sort of led you on that path to realizing that there's this gap here and to trying to becoming a good advocate for diversity in woodworking?
I mean, I kind of backed into it when I never dreamed that I went to theater school. Like I wanted to become an actor, and at the time, but my highest aspiration was to get paid to do good parts in plays in Chicago. Like that would have blown my mind. And then, um, within a few years after school, I was getting to do that. I was a professional actor in Chicago, and then things continued to blossom for me to where I moved to LA. I got to work in TV and film as well as theater, but I never dreamed that my tool use, which I've always loved. I started framing houses as a teenager. I loved like using my carpentry skills to earn money. It felt incredible. And I thought for a time in my 20s that I was gonna make my living as a scenery carpenter in Chicago. Things were trending that way and I was pretty happy about it. But then I figured out naturalism and got people to give me bigger and bigger roles. But so I always stuck with my tool skills. That became furniture making once I got to LA. And I never dreamed that then my big break in the role of Ron Swanson on Parks and Recreation would coincide where they said, oh, we actually really want to exploit your woodworking as well. We think that's a really funny attribute for this guy. And I said, great. In fact, they the episodes, there are a few episodes set in Ron's wood shop. We shot those in my actual shop. So it kind of blew my mind that like my woodworking, sort of became part of my armor as I ascended into the world of like a visible and known performer. And so once I did, and I got to be friends with like Asa, who was running Fine Woodworking at the time, and Chris Schwartz and Megan Fitzpatrick, who were running Popular Woodworking, I got to go on Martha Stewart and teach her how to make a canoe paddle, and do these things, and like get to have a jig that I came up with in Fine Woodworking was, to me, that I think will always be better. Like if I ever won like an Oscar or a Tony, I'll be like, this is the second best thing that's ever happened to me. But all of those things, people began to ask me, they're like, so you really have a woodworking shop? Well, that's neat. So what? That's like for dads in the garage kind of thing. And that messaging was really prevalent. And I guess by nature of my success, taking a big leap in the hands of Mike Schur and Greg Daniels and Amy Poehler and the sensibility and the writers of Parks and Recreation, it really gave me permission to sort of see the values that my wonderful mom and dad imparted in me, or imparted upon me. Mike Schur taught me that I could take that wholesomeness and that affection and aspiration to decency, and like channel that into my work across the board, and that it's it doesn't have to be corny or saccharine or square. Like something as funny as Parks and Rec can have this like really loving message. And I thought, okay, great. I'm clumsy in a lot of ways, so I'm going to try and make clumsy messaging of my own. And part of that's going to be woodworking. But what the world is telling me is that more people need to hear that than dads in their garages. And so just naturally, it was one of the heroic things about Lee, who ran my shop with me. I had my shop for about 8 years when I got Parks and Rec. I had this shop in LA. And it quickly became apparent that I was going to have to hire somebody I was going to have to expand the shop and make it into an actual working concern, or like shut the lights off and lock the door while I went and shot a TV show for 7 months out of the year. And so I put it about to my friends, and a friend of mine named Sam Moyer said, hey, I just did an install downtown with this woman named Lee who outworked the other 3 guys at the install. You should meet her. She's this cool hippie from Berkeley. So I had her in for a meeting, and sure enough, she was tiny. Like, it's funny, there's this size of powerhouse that my wife, Megan Mullally, the legendary actress and singer, and then on Parks and Rec, Amy and Rashida and Aziz and Aubrey, they're all kind of the same size, 5'2" to 5'4", and Lee is kind of in there, but she could be like a professional soccer player, and she just immediately was so impressive, and I was like, holy cow! If you want to come work here, so we had this wonderful serendipitous meeting. And we just talked about that like she had gone to the Knoff school up at College of the Redwoods. And so we began to be a little bit of a pipeline. A lot of the woodworkers that have come through were women or gender nonconforming people. And they also come from the College of the Redwoods, from the Knoff school. And I said, great. This wasn't something we sort of set out to do, but I love this. I love that like, we're communicating to the world that not only should they be making things with their hands and tools and wood, but it's for everybody. girls can make furniture and boys can make cupcakes and everything in between. I hope that I will always get to make both of those things.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And that's a really good point there with how connecting with Lee allowed you to connect with other people. I have found that in the world of publishing is that we know people that are in our communities, and unless if you sometimes take the time to try and get to know someone that maybe isn't in your community, you're missing out on all sorts of great knowledge and stories and experience and stuff like that. So that's something I've worked really hard is to go, okay, like, yeah, I know, we have a virtual Rolodex of woodworkers that have written for us before, but who can we reach out to that's a new voice that's going to teach both us and our audience something new? And that's been really satisfying part of my job is being able to do that. And the amazing things I've learned, the amazing woodworkers I've connected with that way. It's really been a blessing.
It is. I mean, it's a wonderful distillation of a hive mind that the corners of which hive will never fully be finished exploring, because we're going to keep getting tricks and tips from around the world. And even as we think we're exhausting them, we're still thinking up new ones. I mean, just in my shop, when we ended up running with we usually average 4 to 6 employees. I think right now I've got 5 people working in my shop. And, whenever we're laying out any new project, we get everybody around the table and we say, okay, here's what we're thinking. And somebody always chimes in with like, well, you could, how are we going to clamp the glue up, or how are we going to do this? And everybody comes from these different disciplines. And it's become a little bit of a broken record, but because of the weird policies going on in our country right now, it bears repeating that, like, nature proves again and again that in diversity is strength, and in homogeneous science, whether it's planting crops or like racial issues, that is weakness. That is just inviting. If you have only one color of thing, you're inviting nature to like wipe out your crop or your offspring. But in diversity, we find incredible richness and strength. If for no other reason than to get all cuisines into our kitchen, by God.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that really kind of a perfect point there too with there's always new ideas and stuff happening. I had shared something through popular woodworking on social media recently about winding sticks, and someone dropped in the comments that that their vision isn't what they used to be. They couldn't use winding sticks in the traditional way anymore, but they were using angle iron with a digital level or angle gauge on it, and they'd sit up the same way. They'd zero them out. They'd put them on both ends, and then they'd be able to see, okay, here's where the angle's off. This is where I need to raise and lower. And it was like, that is such a cool idea.
Yeah.
But you're still doing something, you know, tactically. But if you can't see down the board, if your vision won't let you focus on that leveling stick anymore, but you can do it with an angle gauge, like that's something I would have never thought of, but it's really cool.
That is really cool, and that's a great example of a compromise between an ancient technique and modern technology.
Yeah. So I am curious. In Good Clean Fun, you talk about the table saw and the bandsaw, that either one could be the centerpiece of your workshop. If you had to pick though, one has to go. Which one of those two would you pick to which one would stay?
I think I think because of where my woodworking is gone, which is more like boats and instruments, curvy stuff, in other words. For that reason, I would say the bandsaw, but I think generally I would say the bandsaw because you can do, you can do more of the table saw's functions on the bandsaw than you can do the bandsaw's functions on the table saw. So, just from a perfectly utilitarian sense, I think the bandsaw is handier. Even though I'm having visions of myself and all my dipshit friends using our muscles to make curves on the table saw, I would absolutely not recommend that to anybody.
Yeah, not advised. Not an advised technique.
Not at all.
As fun as it might be to engage in that sort of stupidity.
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm very grateful. Again, something like the saw stop still astonishes me. I can't believe that thing works the way it does. But I'm so grateful that I still have all 10 fingers for all the years I put in before the saw stop showed up. And all kidding aside, whenever we teach anybody anything in the shop, you say, and if you're around my shop or me in life, I'm a smartass. Like I'm usually trying to make people laugh all the time, and that's maybe when I'm the most somber is when we get into the shop and I say, okay, no joking for a second. That will kill you. This will do this. You can and so we respect all of these machines, and they can hurt our eyes and our ears and our lungs. So here's the equipment that we need. Okay, now back to grab ass.
Yeah. No, in both your books, I think, in Clean Fun and in Little Woodchucks, that the safety part comes before the fun. That's the right order to do that in, learn your machines, learn your safety techniques before even before you pick up a chisel. Like, don't try and catch a chisel with your foot. If it's gonna fall, let it go to the ground. You can always resharpen it. You can't always reattach a toe.
That's true.
I guess I have about all my questions answered. I guess I got one last one here. So if you're talking to someone who's just starting their woodworking journey, is there a particular piece of advice that you would want to give them?
So something I meant to say earlier when I was talking about how I never expected woodworking to become part of my persona, or I'm over the moon that it became part of my brand, as it were, which is part of what has allowed me to keep writing books. In fact, this is the first in a 2-book deal. So soon I'll be starting my 7th book, and I still have a couple other at least woodworking centered books on my wish list. We'll see if I get to do them or not. But no, I've lost it again. Boom, boom, boom. Canoe. Tell me the question that you just asked.
Piece of advice you'd give to someone getting started.
Yes. So among the things I've gotten to do is I've been to a few different think tank seminar things where they invite 100 artists and TV actors and novelists and thinkers to sort of Aspen or TED Talks kind of thing. And I've been to a few of those with Lee where we taught woodworking. And it's kind of funny because I get it. There's a niche sensibility of we have the guy who played Ron Swanson and his shop manager Lee to teach you woodworking, and they give you generally 90 minutes to I think we had 3 hours one time. But I mean, you can imagine, what can you teach anybody in woodworking in 2 or 3 hours? Because they want a hands-on experience. So what I found worked the best for us was we've done a few different versions of a 3-legged stool, but my favorite thing was I got these slabs 12 to 16, 18 inches wide of sort of spalted ambrosia maple. So just some really luscious sort of fudge-like wood. And we would let the people, so I do a little talk, and I talk about how much I love knowing how a tree operates, and how the organic material of wood thinks and operates, and how you need to get along with it and understand what it wants to do, and like the direction in which it wants to move, and how you need to sort of hug it and work with it instead of try to be violent to it. And so I love doing my talk, and I have a couple of graphs of like, this is quarter sawn, and this is all of that stuff. And I have to be pretty quick because people's eyes start to glaze over when you try to explain rift sawn lumber, as you can imagine. But then then we get them up on their feet and give them a nice sharp crosscut saw, and have them pick their piece of a slab, cut it off, and then knock down the edges with sanding and with a rasp, and like a Japanese rasp, and maybe do some shaping. You got some live edge to play with, and basically just sand it down. Sometimes we'll have a drill press set up with just a Forstner bit, so you can drill a hole in the corner to hang it up or whatever. Or, maybe you've cut a little handle onto it, or to make a cheese board kind of thing. But the thrill, the way these people's eyes light up, and we've had like the editors of magazines and movie stars, and they work up a sweat. They've got a dusting of sawdust. They're so excited because they've never done something so gratifying with their bodies. Like they've seen cartoons of people using a saw, and here they are feeling the efficacy of a sharp saw and hearing the sound, and just to be able to cut off a piece of plank blows people's minds. And so that moves me so profoundly, where I'm like, you can do this. Like there are all kinds of tools, and you can do this. You can install, you can sweat pipe and like put a shower outside your house, or you can pave your yard. You can do so many things with tools. And so, for me, that's the advice when anybody wants to start in woodworking. I say, if you can, find somebody around you who supplies wood. Don't ever, like, if my advice to people is, if you can never go to a big box store, Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those big corporate box stores, if you can never go to those, don't ever go to them. They're terrible in every way. They're terrible. It's like Walmart. They are killing off the smaller hardware stores and lumber yards where people care about you and know they have knowledge to share with you. It's just like the Olive Garden killing off the mom and pop restaurant in your town. With all due respect to whatever is good about the Olive Garden, it's just bad. It's bad to have globalization is bad in that way, I think. Food, restaurants, all of that stuff needs to be local. You need to have a dependable food system, and you also need, what if the shit goes down and suddenly we depend on just the people in your county to build stuff or to repair stuff or to feed ourselves? How will your county fare? What will you be able to offer your community besides getting a high score in a video game? So sorry, this is a stupidly long-winded answer. The advice that I would give to people starting out is, find somebody who gets local wood, because you're going to end up getting really cheap scraps from them. And it could be a firewood dealer. It could be somebody working in construction, like drive past construction sites, look in the dumpster, find wood and just get to know wood. Take a big piece of wood and hammer nails into it, sand it, just find beautiful wood, find a piece that fascinates you, sand it down and oil it. And maybe you're making yourself a coaster, a cutting board, just a little totem that you drill a hole through and wear around your neck. Just like if you find the right wood, it could be any of a number of species, and you sand it down and oil it. That's where the magic happens. And you say, oh, I want to do that now, but I want to turn a bowl, or I want to make a table, or whatever it is, that wherever woodworking leads you, that's the magic. It's just making friends with wood and falling in love with it before you ever start buying tools.
I really like that. Yeah, that's because there really is something too. Once you get to that point, you put the oil on the wood, grain pops, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get it now. Like that light bulb goes off, and then you start looking at furniture and other stuff that you've maybe never looked at the same way before. So I like that.
That for me, and that I've seen so many people go through that, where you take a piece of plank that has sharp corners, it's splintery, it's pale and unattractive in its way, and you sand it and oil it. Suddenly, you trust me, like you will feel like you've made a giant wedding cake, or like the most incredible lasagna you've ever seen. Like it really feels like a form of wizardry.
Really does. Okay, well, that's all I've got, and I see it looks like you're about out of time here too. But I thank you so much, Nick, for coming on and for joining me and talking about this. And when does that book come out officially? Little Woodchucks come out?
I believe that's a good question. I believe it's October, whatever the Tuesday is. I'm going to look real quick. It's October like 14th or 16th. 14th.
14th. Okay.
October 14th, and I'm thank you. I'm very grateful to you for having me, and I love spreading this message. I would much rather be in the community of woodworkers than almost any. It's basically sustainable farmers and woodworkers, and that's all we need.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. It's nice to have woodworking advocates and in highly visible spots. So thank you for what you're doing too.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'll try and stay there if I can help it.
Sounds good.
When you're working on a project in the shop, you put in hours of effort. The last thing you want is for the project to come apart because the glue didn't hold. That's why you should keep a bottle of Gorilla Wood Glue on the bench. It's non-foaming, cleans up with water, and dries a natural color. And of course, there's the reliable Gorilla strength you can always trust. Also check out Gorilla Wood Filler for strong, durable repairs. Gorilla is strong enough for the pro and easy enough for the beginner. Built by you, backed by Gorilla. Thanks for listening, everybody.